Hey guys, if you're listening on Thursday, the final day of February, I will be hosting a hangout for paid subscribers, patreon.com/PeteDominic now. And join me in Las Vegas, March 22nd, 23rd for PodJam. Get your tickets. Oh my God, I gotta finish. The music is about to start. Well, hello there, and welcome to the last day of February. It's February 29th, and my guest is the legendary political writer, columnist, reporter, Anna Marie Cox. Joins me on the podcast for the first time, and man, do we have a conversation for you. We start talking at about 23 minutes in after the news. But first, as I have every day, it's time for your headlines. Let's get to it, everybody. Oh, there's a lot to talk about from yesterday. I guess the biggest news has to be what happened at the Supreme Court yesterday. I'll talk with Eric Siegel about this later this morning. Hope to get that conversation up for you by this afternoon. But the big story, of course, is that yesterday the Supreme Court handed Trump a huge win before it even hears the case. That's the headline at Axios. Former President Trump has already won big at the Supreme Court, even if he ultimately loses. The justices agreed yesterday to decide whether Trump enjoys, quote, total immunity from prosecution. The timing of that decision likely means a trial over Trump's role in January 6th won't begin, much less end, before the election. There's nothing Trump wants more than a delay in this case. If he wins in November and hasn't been tried before Inauguration Day, there's a good chance he never will be. Election law expert Rick Hassan writes, this could well be game over. Trump's first briefs are due to the High Court in about 3 weeks. Oral arguments will begin in late April. That sets the stage for a ruling in late June at the end of the court's term. That's about as fast as the Supreme Court is capable of moving, apparently. The justices have kept the actual trial on ice in the meantime. They could have declined to hear Trump's appeal. They wouldn't have had to tackle the question of presidential immunity, and Trump's trial would have proceeded before the election. Once they agreed to hear the appeal and decide whether presidents are beyond the reach of the criminal justice system, keeping the trial paused makes sense. So there you have it. That is the big news from yesterday from the Supreme Court, who also heard arguments on a case involving guns. Yesterday, the justices heard arguments about a Trump-era ban on a gun accessory known as bump stocks. And they appeared torn about a challenge to Trump-era bump stocks, a gun accessory that allows semi-automatic weapons to fire rapidly like machine guns and was used in the deadliest mass shooting in modern U.S. history in Las Vegas. Again, I'll talk more with Eric Siegel about that. And before we're done with Trump legal drama, I got to mention that an Illinois judge has kicked Trump off of the primary ballot in Illinois. 2 other states, Colorado and Maine, have removed him from their primary ballots for violating the 14th Amendment insurrection clause. The final outcome would likely be decided by the U.S. Supreme Court. But early voting in the primaries already begun. Illinois' primary election is scheduled for March 19th. But an Illinois judge has ruled that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection has barred him from the state's primary ballot, though she put the ruling on hold pending an appeal. Oh, and one more Trump legal story. There was a lot of it yesterday. A New York appellate court denied Donald Trump's attempt to freeze the judgment in his civil fraud case, a ruling that means for now that the disgraced former president is required to post a bond for hundreds of millions of dollars in the coming weeks. Defense attorneys for this super loser said that he was prepared to post a $100 million bond, arguing he had no way to secure a higher amount without selling off some of his real estate. A bond to cover the judgment in this case would have to be at least 120% of the total judgment, more than $550 million, attorneys said. All right, well, enough about him and his legal drama, which is all important, but let's talk about something else. Top U.S. lawmakers have vowed to avert a partial government shutdown ahead of a Friday deadline to approve funding. Christian nationalist and accountability expert House Speaker Mike Johnson told reporters, "We will get the government funded," after a meeting with President Biden on Tuesday. And how about this? Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, the longest-serving senator in history, who has maintained his power in the face of dramatic convulsions in the Republican Party for almost 2 decades, will step down from that position in November, reporting from the Associated Press and everywhere else. Apparently, he wants to spend more time not destroying America, and he will go down in history as a real stain on the American. I mean, who likes him? Republicans don't like him. Democrats don't like him, obviously. And now that 82-year-old has announced he will step down, who will take his place? We will see, but that is big news from yesterday as well. Now let's head to Texas, where wildfires are spreading across the Texas Panhandle, threatening towns, forcing evacuations, and cutting off power to thousands of homes and businesses. The fire at Smokehouse Creek is the name of this fire, north of Amarillo, has burned through 850,000 acres and is only 3% contained. It has quickly become the second largest wildfire in Texas history. Let's go overseas, where the headline at ABC News is death toll tops 30,000 in Gaza. More than 30,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the war began on October 7th, more than 4 months since Hamas terrorists invaded Israel. On October 7th, the Israeli military continues its bombardment of the neighboring Gaza Strip. The conflict, now the deadliest between warring sides since Israel's founding in 1948, shows no signs of letting up, and the brief ceasefire that allowed for over 100 hostages to be freed from Gaza remains a distant memory. More than 70,000 others have been wounded by Israeli forces, according to Gaza's Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health. So hard to know how accurate those numbers are, but if they're anywhere near that, and no matter what, it's an absolute tragedy and a horrific amount of violence and suffering that must end. The World Health Organization has confirmed this grim milestone. The director writing a post on social media that a large majority of those killed in Gaza are women and children. This horrific violence and suffering must end, he says. And let's head over to the war in Eastern Europe, where yesterday Putin's gave his State of the Nation address 2 weeks ahead of a presidential election, which he's expected to win another 6-year term in a landslide. Covered the war in Ukraine, threat of NATO expansion, Russian nuclear capabilities, the decline of birth rate, and support for large families. He also said Russia will fight back and defeat NATO on their own territory against the threat of expansion, which he warned could trigger a nuclear war, of course. Ukrainian forces have pushed back Russian troops from the village of Orlivka, west of Avdiivka, but the situation on the Eastern Front remains difficult. Ukraine's military said this week it had withdrawn from 2 more villages near Avdiivka, losing more territory as support from its Western allies runs short. And finally, Hunter Biden testified behind closed doors yesterday in front of Congress. Lauren Boebert's 18-year-old son has been arrested and faces 22 charges in connection to vehicle break-ins and property theft. And the universe lost one of its funniest comedians. Richard Lewis has passed away at the age of 76, and he was a great guy and a super talented comic. It's been really amazing to see the tributes pouring out from my comedian friends and others who knew him so well. A major loss yesterday, and those are your headlines for the final day of February. And now let's get to a few audio clips from yesterday. First of all, reaction to that big decision from the Supreme Court kicking the can down the road, giving what MSNBC's legal analyst Andrew Weissman, who pronounces the word so, a real headache, and he says this gives Trump de facto immunity.
I still think that there's no way that they're going to say that Donald Trump is immune from this criminal prosecution. But if they, let's say, took even 2 weeks to make that decision, that brings us into May. They then say to Judge Chutkan, you can go forward. That's sort of the best case scenario. She has at least a couple months of work, of pretrial work that she has indicated that she has to do in order the parties have to litigate a whole variety of issues. She has to pick a jury. She needs jury questionnaires. So we're talking at the earliest, really at the earliest, a couple months after that. So that brings us into July. So we're getting perilously close to the election, and that's sort of the best case scenario. It could, for the same reason that I'm surprised the Supreme Court took this long just to issue this short decision about the timing. I'm sort of giving a best case scenario that it's just a couple weeks for them to render their decision. But that's you can't take that to the bank. That could be much longer. And so this is a case where they could, by what they're doing now, pocket veto the case actually going forward. I think that would, in many ways, would be the very worst possible outcome for the citizens of this country. I really do think that the best outcome here is to have a trial, make sure that, the government has to prove its case. If they can't, then the defendant, whether you like that person or not, is acquitted. But I think having a trial is the thing that's required here. And the Supreme Court, I really fear, could be politicizing this in terms of the timing that they're imposing on the district court.
All right. Well, you can thank Mitch McConnell for all of this because he, of course, prevented Barack Obama from appointing Merrick Garland or ever even having a confirmation hearing to the Supreme Court, which would have changed, well, everything. One could blame all kinds of different people and causes for the election of 2016, which also brought those 3 justices on the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court continues to sell America out and off and destroy us, and we'll continue to talk about it, try to understand it, and, of course, the only answer to this is to expand the court. At least that's how I see it. But here is one of the most effective reactionary politicians in modern history who no longer has a future in the Republican Party because he supported things like aid to Ukraine. Mitch McConnell, who my friend Shannon Watts of Mom's Demand said on Twitter, Senator Mitch McConnell's legacy will be that he purposely undermined America's first black president, broke the Supreme Court, and helped elect a fascist president, and he abetted up an insurrection on American soil. Here is McConnell on the Senate floor yesterday announcing his upcoming retirement.
Believe me, I know the politics within my party at this particular moment in time. I have many faults. Misunderstanding politics is not one of them. That said, I believe more strongly than ever that America's global leadership is essential to preserving the shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan discussed. As long as I'm drawing breath on this earth, I will defend American exceptionalism. So as I've been thinking about when I would deliver some news to the Senate, I always imagined a moment when I had total clarity and peace about the sunset of my work. A moment when I'm certain I have helped preserve the ideals I so strongly believe. That day arrived today.
I think I just heard his body, something in his body, make a noise as well at the end of that sentence. Let's go back. You heard that. He farted, right? Yes, that's exactly how he should go out. Our friend Wajed Ali tweeted, Mitch McConnell is one of the most odious and destructive human beings ever to sully Congress with his presence. The fact his resignation means Republican replacement will be even more unhinged reveals the depths of GOP's extremism. It's not a normal party. Norman Ornstein writes, I will not match Mitch McConnell as leader. For reasons why, read It's Even Worse Than It Looks. That's his book. And Google Ornstein and McConnell to see us interact. But keep in mind that we will now see Thune, Cornyn, and Barrasso vie to replace him, all by moving further right. Not good. Oh, I want to see that whole history with Norman Ornstein and Mitch McConnell. I should get him on the show to talk about it. Always great. All right, well, let me move on to some other bullshit, but still big story yesterday. Long-awaited testimony. Hunter Biden, the president's son, sharply rebuking House Republicans' impeachment inquiry during closed-door deposition on Wednesday, condemning their investigation as a partisan political pursuit that was based on false premise and fueled by lies. Conducted yesterday in an office building in Capitol Hill, the interview was the latest bid by Republicans to unearth evidence that President Biden was inappropriately involved in his son's foreign business dealings. So far, their impeachment investigation, like all of the rest of their investigations, has turned up nothing. Zero. Zilch. But Hunter Biden sought to refute Republican claims about his relationship with his father, making clear in his opening statement, a copy of which was obtained by the New York Times, that he planned to cede no ground. He wrote, "You have trafficked in innuendo, distortion, and sensationalism, all the while ignoring the clear and convincing evidence staring you in the face. You do not have evidence to support the baseless and MAGA-motivated conspiracies about my father because there isn't any." None of this, however, has stopped the Republicans' mission to find something, even though there is nothing. James Comer announced another impeachment public hearing, so it looks like Bill B. and DC and I are wrong and Kevin Richburg is right. They're not giving up, at least for now. But before the hearing was even over, Democrats ran out to the microphones. Here's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
I think the ranking member stated it completely. What we just witnessed over the last hour was, I think, a deep-sea fishing expedition because the Republican case has completely fallen apart over the last several weeks. After it's been exposed that the critical, one of their most key pieces of information was based on a source that was in communication with Russian intelligence. They are now trying to scramble to find anything to substantiate their fairy tale.
Here is Jamie Raskin.
What we saw, I think, was a rather embarrassing spectacle where the Republicans continued to belabor completely trivial points. They seem to be obsessively focused on speakerphones and use of speakerphone. I did not know that that was the devil's technology, but apparently it is. I believe, based on this first hour, that this whole thing really has been a tremendous waste of our legislative time and the people's resources.
And here is Daniel Goldman.
I want to be very clear. That first hour of this much anticipated testimony was the nail in the coffin to what is a complete bogus and sham impeachment inquiry. Not only were they unable to show any connection between Hunter Biden's business and President Biden, but Hunter Biden gave very detailed and clear explanations as to what his arm's length business transactions were with private parties in foreign countries who are investors and business people, like many people would have. He went through a laundry list of board seats and jobs that he has had over his 30-year career after he left Yale Law School, and he withstood some inappropriate attacks even in the first hour. So it is not simply there's no connection to the president, which we've known all along and which was made clear again, but there is a very understandable, coherent business explanation for every single thing that they asked for.
Well, this is creating a real problem for the Fox and the Friends. Here they are arguing about it yesterday.
There is evidence.
Well, I think Ainsley, there are many lawmakers who say they've seen zero evidence of high. But
what we just said, say that they have.
But to impeach somebody, you need direct evidence of misconduct by Joe Biden. Look, Hunter Biden, it sure looks like he traded on his name, and he's going to have plenty of time
with his
today.
Dad, the role his dad has played is key.
We're going to have plenty of time, the Republicans are, to ask him a million questions. It will be interesting to hear what he has to say. But right now, according to Republicans, there's no...
What Republicans?
Some Republicans say they've got the goods on Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, but a number of Republicans who I've spoken to on Capitol Hill say there's no direct evidence of misconduct by the current president.
They're just so corrupt.
This is so unbelievable.
Corrupt.
Oh, how about it? Brian Kilmeade said this is so unbelievable, and Anzi Earhart says that whole family is so corrupt. These two totally in the tank, of course, for Donald Trump and looking the other way on all of his multitude of crimes. Talk about terrible and unbelievable and corrupt. Those two, well, Ducey as well, but at least he challenges them from time to time. And speaking of challenging Republicans, here on CNN on this yesterday, it's Boris Sanchez versus Republican Representative Tim Burchett.
Pardon me, sir. There's a huge distinction. There's a huge distinction between whether it's appropriate for the family of a president to make money off of his name and whether that's ethical. But the question is specifically about what Joe Biden did when he was in office in vice president, whether he abused his power or whether he enriched his family members. And right now, there is zero evidence coming from the Oversight Committee that when he was vice president, he did either of those things.
There's $20 million that flowed through. You saw these accounts.
That's
open
incorrect,
up
sir. The bank
after,
records
after,
don't reflect
after,
that.
No, sir.
They don't specifically say. I looked at the bank records. They don't say that Joe Biden got any money from them. Have you read the bank records? Because they don't list Joe Biden's name. I'm not going to let you. I'm not going to let you say things that are untrue, sir.
So, sir, the truth is that $20 million flowed through this family, whichever way it went. There's no records of taxes being paid. Statutes have run, and you're saying that
is
that
a
is
talking
okay.
point
And
that
what
you've
was
repeated,
what
but
was
it is
the
not
product?
actually
What
what's
was
in
the
the bank
product?
records, sir. What's in the bank records is that $15 million of that money never even went to the Biden family. The other $5 million, there is exactly zero indication
where did that $15 million go to? Where did that?
Yeah, that's the world we live in. You can just go on TV or on Facebook and you could say a thing happened or didn't happen when it did happen. You can just say that and there doesn't need to be any evidence. I mean, just look at the election outcomes. It was challenged at how many courts? Dozens of cases were challenged in courts across the country, including with Trump-appointed justices, and they laughed them all out. All of these scenarios of cheating, ballot harvesting, and wild-eyed conspiracies, they were all kicked out, but it doesn't matter. The big lie is the only thing that matters, and that is why it's so frustrating to have to deal with folks in this world, that your argument doesn't have to be based in any kind of fact or evidence. And we're not talking about whether or not the minimum wage is effective at this rate or that rate or the solutions to climate. We're talking about, did the man land on the moon or not? Did the sun come up in the east or not? Are you going to eat the rest of that or not? You know what I'm saying. All right, well, finally, I've got a clip of Richard Lewis. I like to end the news with a laugh, and we lost Richard Lewis yesterday. He died of a heart attack at age 76. But here is some of his stand-up comedy from Comic Relief 3. This is, I think, almost like 30 years ago, maybe more, but I thought it was funny, and I wanted to share it.
I'm excited. I'm just a little paranoid tonight. I haven't performed in a couple of months, and yet, hey, I'm paranoid about everything in my life. Even at home, on my stationary bike, I have a rear view mirror, which I'm not thrilled about. And sadly, my last shrink, she retired about a week ago. I'm freaked out, and it was sort of a nightmare. She was only 24. I guess I burned her out real fast, and the last session was unbelievable. She set herself on fire. She ran out of the session going, "No mas, no mas," you know. So what do? I'm on the road. I'm a comic. You know, you go to these clinics, all these rip-off clinics now. I was in Dallas. I had this therapy amusement park, Six Flags over Bellevue, you know, and I use those phone services, 1-900 you wacko, which is a big thing now. But hey, what's my problem? What's your for me? I have bad posture. I have low self-esteem. I'm unhappy about it. I could blame my parents. I want to blame my parents for practically everything. Look. After high school, I said, what should I do? I have no idea what I should do. And they went, well, we think you should run away with the circus. And that wasn't good for me. But hey, don't I have to take responsibility for my own life? I think it's about time. I'm 40 years old, and I just, but still, I screwed myself up. Elementary school, during student government week, I was a coroner for a day, which wasn't a big thing, Then, freshman basketball, I was the throw in the towel boy, which was sort of humiliating. And even like a week ago, I'm in bed. This woman, I was so looking forward to this sexually, and I'm screwed up. She says, don't you want to have an orgasm? And I said, what's in it for me? So. And yet, what's in it?
There you go. The great Richard Lewis has left us, but that he was a legend, and it was great to see the outpouring of love for him. I interviewed him once a billion years ago at SiriusXM. Real nice guy. Everybody said the same thing about him, and that is how you want to leave. All right. Well, now it's time to get to my guest for the day. Remember, I can't do this without you. Support me at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. I hope to see you at our hangout tonight, 8 p.m., and in Las Vegas, March 22nd and 23rd. But now it's time to get to Marie Cox, who I'm very excited to have on the show for the first time. She's now a columnist for The New Republic and NBC. She's the co-host of a podcast about science fiction called Space the Nation with a very smart Daniel Drezner. She's done it all, and she's seen it all in the world of journalism. But today, our conversation is quite personal about her own life. The past 3 years have been really challenging for Anna. She's been open about this publicly. She's offering a really cool workshop that helps deal with it called the Third Story Workshop, which is an 11-week virtual writing workshop for anyone with a before and after in their lives, she says. Check it out at AnnaMarieCox.com. We talked about her depression, her addiction, the fact that she'd attempted suicide at one point, and what it's like to be single and 50, and so much more. This is a deep and personal conversation, and while we don't know each other too well, I like to think that this conversation sounds like we do. It's a little bit different than what I do on a regular basis, but I hope you like it. I certainly did. I'm really excited to be talking with her today and more in the future, it sounds like. Ladies and gentlemen, Marie Cox.
Okay, now we're recording. Okay.
I am so happy to see you and to talk to you. I have so much respect for your entire career, as I always have, so it's great to get you here one-on-one to ask you a million questions, to talk about your life and where you've been at, because you've been so honest and vulnerable. How are you? How's it going?
I am working on having positive replies to that question. We were chatting just a little bit before you hit record, and I said, it's been like most of the world. I've had a rough 3 years, and it has been really part of the journey has been breaking out of the story that I tell myself about that. And one of the ways that I've decided I need to start telling or retelling, changing that story is when people ask how I'm doing, like, I want to be honest, like when things are hard, but also this is just part of my story where I am right now. Like it's not the end of the story. I'm not like going to be where I am for the rest of my life. Like there's a future ahead. And I have been doing a lot of growth and healing, and I think that the universe tends to help you out if you're doing that work. So kind of betting on that, like having some faith in that.
It's really fascinating to watch from the outside, to watch how you've talked about your life, how you've written about it these past few years, and the struggles that you've had with addiction and depression, and really open about it. I guess it's most fascinating because growing up, you were such a big deal. You still are such a big deal. But the idea is when you see someone who's such a big deal, and then you find out that they struggle and realize that they're human, but you're on camera for years. You were doing all the gigs. And, for me coming up, you were like a senior and I was a freshman, and you were always kicking ass, and you were in every room and interviewing all these people. And I always just assumed, you don't struggle. And then when work changes and life changes and you're honest about it, truth is we're probably always struggling. Were you struggling then with different things, or when you were career-wise, how we identify ourselves?
It's funny. I've been looking through a lot of old journals. I'm working on a memoir, and that is not coming along as fast as I told the publishers it would. That's probably something that publishers are used to hearing.
Yeah, it's got to be hard. It's going to be really hard.
But I've been going through old journals, and it's been, I have trouble finding the words to say what it's been like. I mean, one of the description I can give is that it's made me very sad for the young woman that I'm reading about. Because in these journals, there are clips from newspapers and magazines, and there are photos that show a successful, vibrant person who's having all these cool experiences, White House, being featured. I had forgotten, like, there's this photo spread in Vanity Fair that I was in, really cool stuff. And then in the journals, there is this young woman who's constantly down on herself, talking about working harder, doing more, being more in shape, reading more, being better in relationships. Like, there is just, if you read just the journals, you would think that this woman was having an incredibly tough time in her life.
What do you think? Is that a bad thing, the way that you were then, the way that we sometimes are? As someone might read that and go, you sound like you were very driven.
Yeah, I'll take good and bad out of it and say what I wish is that woman had been able to enjoy the fruits of her talent and been able to have more faith in herself, and I didn't enjoy a lot of the stuff that was happening. And I think on some level, I thought I didn't deserve it. And one of the ways I've been thinking about what the things that have unfolded in the past few years is that I was working so hard and grinding my gears. That's the best metaphor, I think, like putting all this pressure on myself and not having, if we'll just use the engine metaphor, no lubricants, like including what I once used, which was alcohol, right? Like that was what kept the gears from really grinding each other. But also I had very little self-compassion and very little capacity for pleasure and very little capacity for joy. And, you know, when things really started to get intense, and by that I mean, you know, my marriage started falling apart, journalism industry started falling apart, my gears got stuck, and pandemic happened also. Let's remember that too. So I kind of froze. I mean, I have continued to work, and I've continued to my career. This is another story that I'm working on. Like, how do I tell my story? Like, if I look back over the past 3 years, like, I've continued to work, like, I've continued to show up, but my journals and the way that I talk to myself is just full of like not doing enough. And I did have some like health stuff happen last year that kept me from, that sidelined me in a little bit more serious way than I had been before. More, serious. I don't know. Meds, health, mental health, like that 6 months of 2023 were just like, I wasn't working at all.
Wow.
But I'm also grateful, and I'm trying to be more grateful, because what I think has happened is I've hit sort of a second bottom in terms of my recovery. Like, the first bottom was because I was using too many substances, mostly alcohol, but some benzos as well. Mm-hmm. And I had a few suicide attempts, and that put me in rehab, and I got sober. And
you've talked about all of this openly. Particularly, I listened to the conversation you had with your friend John Moe, which everybody should listen to on his great podcast. I'll link to it here, but you talk about this, so just so people know, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but yeah. Oh, no. It's you can get the in-depth story on that one. But I'll say, like, that's just like the one, and that's hopefully the only bottom of that kind I'll have. But, you know, dealing with the aftermath of my divorce, and which hit me in a way, my second marriage, into my first marriage did not hit me in the same way. And I think part of that had to do with the fact that I started dating my second husband pretty quick, and he was a fellow alcoholic. And I got to just like stuff a bunch of stuff that a lot of times people deal with when they get sober, you know, like childhood shit and whatnot comes up, and you wind up working with it. And I got to just like, nope, I will just breeze past that and continue to be a workaholic and continue to have like this incredibly negative self-talk, and which I do see as a form of addiction these days. Like, and then when the marriage fell apart, I was just left with myself. And that turned out to be what needed to happen, but I wasn't prepared for it. How long ago was that?
Or maybe I was prepared for it because I'd been sober for 10 years. And actually it's true. Like, if I had been sober for 10 years when I got divorced, I think that the temptation to relapse would have been
maybe you weren't prepared in that moment for the relationship to end, but you were prepared emotionally. You had modalities and you had the resilience that you acquired through your previous recovery to deal with this new circumstance, because things fall apart. They will continue to fall apart, but you build, hopefully you build something so that when they do, you're a little bit more ready. Does that sound like anything, what I just said? Yeah, and it was just a process of kind of using the tools that I had, and then sometimes those tools stopped working, and then finding new tools. And I don't know where I am today. I feel better. There's a saying in, AA recovery, which is sick and tired of being sick and tired. Yeah. And I think December and January for me got to be a place of, I am just tired of feeling this way about my life. I'm tired of like talking this way about my life. And the other thing that happened, and when I talk about sort of the second bottom, is I did have this realization where, my inspiration to get sober from chemicals was I knew I would die if I didn't. Right. Like, in part because my mother developed cirrhosis before I got sober. Her drinking led her to cirrhosis. And by the time I got sober, she was incredibly sick.
And cirrhosis is a real bad way to go. Let's not get into the details. Let's just pause it. It's a real bad way to go because you lose your mind, among other things. Like you get what's called wet brain and you develop alcoholic dementia, which she did. And so I had this very vivid image of my mom's death all through my early sobriety, which is like, don't want that. Like, don't want that. I will stay sober. And what I realized over the 3 months, past 3 months ago is, you know what I also don't want is just the small life that my mom lived and that I've been living. I don't want that small life anymore.
What does that mean, small life?
Limited in my dreams for myself, limited in my relationship with myself, limited in what I feel like I'm capable of, and not being expansive in what there is to enjoy. Like those journals about how little I was enjoying myself, how little I was like experiencing the life that I had, and also just expanding my community too. I think that that's part of it. Oh, and then the most important part, which is that I realized that if I continue to live small and continue to indulge in the negative self-talk and the self-berating and the crushing of myself. Like I think of myself as my whole life I've been just like bear down on myself, just like must work harder, will always work harder. If I can just work harder, then things will get better. If I can just work hard enough, things will get better enough. If I continue to do that, that will kill me too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
That will kill me. Maybe not. I might not commit suicide or die by overdose, but it will make my life short. I think it would literally make my life shorter. And relapsing is also up there. If I get that, if I continue to just not let up on myself, that could kill me.
How important is it to understand what you've been diagnosed with throughout your life? You talk about having language to be able to understand for yourself and explain to others what you're dealing with. And I think when people are diagnosed with different things, all kinds of things that can happen. You can rest on it. You can buy into it. You can question it. You can take solutions that are offered by experts and so on. But I feel like it begins with the language. So you've been talking about addiction. You talked about all the different things that you've dealt with. What else have you been diagnosed with, and why does the language matter for you?
So I have bipolar disorder, and in addition to being an alcoholic, and I don't mind calling myself an alcoholic. I know there's a little bit of like pushback among some people who want to talk about alcohol use disorder or having addiction disorder or what have you. And I don't. Everyone should get to call themselves what they want, right? Like everyone should get to say whatever language is useful for them.
Right.
I don't mind alcoholic. And to get back to the language, to get back to what it does for me is, you know, I'm a big 12-step stan. And to me, it's like taking back that word. It's when I say my name is Anna, I'm an alcoholic. Like to me, that's not, when I say it in the space that I say it in, it's not a judgment. It's just a bunch of us, you know, sitting around telling our stories and trying to get better.
I always feel almost a lack of language, but almost jealous that there's a community and there's groups everywhere you go for people deal with this issue versus any of the number of issues that I deal with.
There are probably more groups than you realize.
Yeah, I'm sure there are, but I think that the idea that you can go and you can find that community that you just mentioned of people who are dealing with something is great. It's awesome. And I sometimes wonder if I'm missing out. And so maybe I should drink more.
Well, you are missing out because, you know, AA is a wonderful thing. Like it is, I believe, you know, I personally believe it to be like divinely inspired.
How long have you been going?
I will have, actually what I'll say is I have 12 years and 11 months as of this week.
Of sobriety or that you've been going to AA?
Sobriety. And that's,
wow.
I started going to AA about a year, I guess, before I got sober. So like been going to I was in and out of sobriety for about a year.
So before you tout it and tell me why it's great. So just real quick, how often do you go? And if you're traveling, would you go into and find a new meeting?
Oh my God. I love AA tourism.
That's called AA tourism.
I've been to AA meetings in London. I've been to AA meetings across the country. London's, I guess, the only exotic location, but not really exotic. The only place not in the U.S. But I love going to meetings in different cities and towns, different parts of the same city that I live in. There's different personalities to different cities. Yeah, I mean, but I also want to point out. So let's drop a bookmark for my other favorite program, which is Adult Children of Alcoholics and Dysfunctional Families, which is the program I've been doing for the past couple of years, and I think its doors are open to a lot more people than AA's doors. AA's doors are open to anybody, by the way, I should say. All of it is required. The only thing required for membership is a desire to stop drinking. You do not have to call yourself an alcoholic. You do not have to consider yourself an alcoholic. You can just go.
How often do you go?
Right now, I go to about 2 AA and 2 ACA meetings a week. So 4 12-step meetings a week.
And why is it so great?
Well, they're 2 different programs. So I'm going to talk about AA. AA, the people are hilarious.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, you must know a lot of alcoholics.
I mean,
hysterically funny people.
I think for sure, but
great storytellers.
Yeah. I wonder about the Venn diagram where you have a great storyteller and funny guy, and then this annoying guy that's just talking about shit that doesn't even have anything to do with anything. And you're just like, ugh, not Bruce again.
Well, Bruce, there are Bruces, but in fact, very early when I started going, before I really got sober, there was this one guy in a meeting that used to share just the same fucking story every time.
I'd be
literally the same story every time.
I'd be out. And I can't support it. I gotta go.
And I remember going to somebody else in the meeting and being like, Bruce, whatever his name was.
Yeah.
And the person saying, Anna, that's the story he has to tell in order to stay sober today. And I was like, fuck.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Fine.
All right.
I guess I'll have some patience. I guess I'll have some grace.
Oh, good for you.
But
those are
for the most part, I find the stories in 12-step rooms to be pretty hilarious. And when they're not hilarious, they're interesting. So I love the people. I love that we're there for common purpose, but it's not a purpose to sell anything or to promote anything. Right. It's just to get better. Actually, this morning I went to a meeting. We talked about how AA is the longest running, largest anarchist organization in the world. There's no leadership.
Right.
There's no dues or fees. It's all voluntary. There's no elected leaders. There's actually, for the most part, things are all passed by consensus. There's actually there's voting, but their minority has to be heard and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You all set up, you all break down, nobody's in charge. It's real anarchy, and yet it is
real anarchy. And what makes it work though is that there's no purpose to it beyond service for others. If we were trying to do something, it'd probably fall apart.
That's interesting. Right. If the goal was to build a house in the neighborhood, you'd all be at each other's, or it just wouldn't work. But the idea,
in fact, I've seen that. I've seen when AA meetings try to do something specific, something small, even put on a banquet or something. It works, but it gets more complicated when we're just there for a meeting. It's much easier. So, and I love the steps. I've actually started this little tiny at the site called Buy Me a Coffee, just because I've started kind of micro blogging. And writing an essay a week on the steps.
Yeah, it's great. I've seen that. It looks really cool. People should check it out. You can see it on Instagram. And
buymeacoffee.com/Anna Marie Cox. It's I don't know how I found it. It's just I just liked the idea of blogging again and associating sobriety and coffee. And I don't want a newsletter. I'm anti-newsletter.
Why?
So
you're perfectly suited for it.
I know. And Substack came to me early on, and maybe I should have taken the money and run, but I wasn't psychically in a place where I could think about it. In part because I think asking people Substack to get one of their deals, even though they're not giving the big ones away anymore, is you have to write you have to put out 3 newsletters a week, which is stupid. very few people have three significant things to say every week, and
that's
also
I fully agree, which is why I published every day, but it's never, I get the best guests you can find. That's not hard to do, to find.
Totally different.
I'm not producing anything. I'm just here chirping away and moving things along, traffic copying, but I get the best people. I get the best Anna Marie Cox.
I agree that's completely different, but and there's a couple people out there that have newsletters that I like. Today in Tabs is the only newsletter I read every day.
Oh, never even heard of it.
Highly recommend Today in Tabs.
Oh, wow.
Which is exactly what it sounds like. It's kind of like what's up on the internet today.
Shit.
Never
heard of it. Cool.
But other than that, I subscribe to a bunch of my friends' newsletters because a bunch of my friends are otherwise unemployed journalists. And you know how many of them I read every day? Probably zero.
Right.
And I don't want to. I wish they would send me fewer emails.
Right.
I love them but also how many times, I don't know when it's going to be actually worth reading, who out there is reading what they need is an editor. What they need is someone to pick out the stuff that's really good. And the other reason I don't want to start a newsletter is I think it's this false hope for journalism. It's like the cryptocurrency of media right now. The people who get in early are going to make a lot of money, but everyone else is just feeding off scraps. And
that's for sure.
I don't know how my budget is maxed out. My newsletter budget, if I subscribe to if I paid for every newsletter, I would be paying $100 a month, whereas I have a New York Times subscription for 25 something a month for digital, and I get hundreds of bylines. Now, New York Times is problematic. I want to support other places, but you're asking a lot from readers.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
And someone is there have been a couple places that have kind of come out as newsletters that have a few different people writing them, and congratulations, you've invented a magazine.
Right. Or just a zine.
I don't know. I don't know what the future is. Part of me just doesn't want to I probably am, positioned for it. I would rather write a sobriety column for somebody.
Yeah. Why not do more podcasting or videoing?
Well, podcast industry, Pete.
Well, yeah, no, don't. I want to talk about all of it with you, but I just think that you're uniquely qualified for a lot of different things. But I've really been interested in hearing you talk about your own life experience and the addiction and the sobriety. I'm finding it fascinating, and maybe it's because it's you, and I've always been a fan of yours and your work, and seeing you talk about all these things, so vulnerable and transparent. I'm drawn to it every time I see one of your posts. That's why I reached out to you. I was like, I can't believe she's talking about this. But I also think if someone didn't know your past work and saw you talking about it, I still think it would be appealing because of your ability to articulate yourself and be so vulnerable. So if you wanted to
I would love to start podcasting again, honestly. I do have a podcast, but it's a science fiction podcast.
Yeah, I saw that with Daniel Drezner, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, I can't talk about any of that with her. I can't. I don't know what to say.
It's okay. It's a labor of love. We literally break even on Patreon. Because we employ a real editor, which I'm sure you appreciate, having someone who actually can take out the ums and whatnot.
Well, I do it all that myself. I've got programs. I do it all. It's crazy.
Maybe I should learn to do it myself, but we actually have someone that we employ, which means that the podcast just barely breaks even.
Right.
But I love doing that, but I miss doing my interview podcast a lot. And I have thought about just starting it back up again. It's true. Maybe this is maybe this will be the.
Not only that, I'll produce it for you. For God's sake, if you're thinking about
all right, you're on.
Done.
We'll make the deal right now.
Yeah, not especially. I would produce. I would do anything to help you. Put your voice out there about politics with us.
Then people are getting exclusive news. I have been thinking about it. Ever since I decided I wanted to tell my story a little differently, I've been like, Anna, you missed that so much. You got so much out of it. Why aren't I was doing it for Crooked Media, and they had a very understandable kind of regroup and reassess, like not post pandemic, I guess, peri-pandemic, what would we call it? Like, and the podcast market really changed, right?
Yeah.
And I want to just be very clear. Like, I think they do cool stuff, and I'm really happy that I had a chance to like be on that rocket ride when they were starting. But also, like, I was probably not in a great place to like keep doing a weekly show, to be totally honest.
Well, I think that, I mean,
but I miss it. I totally miss, like, I don't know if you listened to that show, but it was called With Friends Like These. And the startup idea was like talking through difficult stuff.
Yeah, no, it's really good. I listened to it back when you were doing it.
Yeah. And I miss having like these, I miss having an excuse to seek out voices that I felt like needed to get higher platforms. I'm very proud of the fact that I interviewed like Ibram X. Kendi before George Floyd, you know, like Alice Wong, who's a great disability rights activist, like had her on a bunch. Parker Malloy, who's now like got her own great newsletter going.
Doing really well. Yeah.
I feel very proud to have had a small part in like elevating some of those voices. And I loved finding those voices. That was real. I'm sure you understand like the joy that comes when
it's the pride of my, it's the pride of my career. And I think it's a sign of credibility I think if anything, for me, that's what I do best is find smart people. And, you know, I mean, being able to do that, the feeling of that, putting that voice out there is, I can't think of anything that could drive me personally more. So yeah, if I couldn't do it, and I thought I wouldn't be able to when I lost my corporate gig, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I know the feeling. So if you want to do it, you should absolutely do it. 'Cause you're so good. I was so intimidated by wanting to talk with you today. I was like, she's so highbrow. I hope I can keep up. But I think
I haven't cited one Kierkegaard essay yet. So like,
it's coming. I feel it coming around.
Well, let's talk Habermas, shall we?
Is that how it's pronounced? See, that's all I got. So let me get back though to your life and we can talk further about podcasting.
Then we'll strategize the next podcast.
Yeah. Well, just call me when we're done. I mean, I'll talk to you about all of it because like I said, huge fan from the beginning, but you talked about the last 3 years and where you're at and kind of, you know, the second bottom and the lotus flower grows from the mud, I think is someone told me when I was like, where are you in the flowering, in the budding phase, in the growth? Because you also mentioned before we hit record about how hard it's been, but then you immediately pivoted to growth. And I think that's the thing. That's the stuff that I'd love to hear you talk about every week, by the way, because you have a setback, you have a struggle, you have an obstacle, you lose ground. And that's where you grow. That's when things fall apart. That's when you grow. I'm a big Pema Chodron fan.
In 12-step rooms, sometimes you hear about another fucking growth opportunity. It's sort of like the recovery world version of taking a stupid walk for my stupid mental health. You know, like, God, it's another fucking growth opportunity. Yeah, I had a bunch of growth opportunities. You know, I am writing this memoir and it turned out to like, I think that's one of the reasons why I kind of got thrown into crisis is that I knew that people would want to hear my story. And so and I needed money. So I was like, all right, I'm going to write a book proposal. I'm going to sell this book. And I did. And then I was like, oh shit, I'm going to have to actually like dig through my trauma. And one of the lines that I've written for the book is like, this book almost killed me, but also if I don't write it, it'll kill me. Like it brought up, diving into that stuff just brought up everything. You know?
Is it helpful or does it make things worse? Because I think about that a lot when people do have serious childhood trauma or past trauma of any sort, and they know to get better, or they believe, a lot of people believe, to get better, you got to get to the root of where that trauma comes from so you can understand why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. But man, that's real scary too. And I think I'll just avoid it because I don't want to walk back into that fire. That house is on fire. And if I walk into it, I'll catch fire.
You know, I mean, I think
but I got to go in there and save the little girl.
I put myself in a position where I had no choice. You know, thank God for Random House.
Right. It made your job to go into the fire.
Yeah. And I was able to have it as my job for like a year and a half. And I didn't do as much writing as I thought I would do, but I did a lot of work. Part of it was like literal like research which the premise of the book was I was going to go back and look at my mom's life. And I did do that, but it just kept getting really hard. I discovered, because I had spent 50 years telling myself it wasn't that bad. I wasn't, physically beaten. I wasn't, starved. But even I hear say that out loud to you, and I'm like, well, no, those are some really low bars. It's
all perspective too, really, right? And
also, I actually had a great conversation with Parker about this once when we were talking about, she's a trans person, and there's part of me that's doesn't want to be I don't want to encroach upon her trauma, but trauma is trauma. And she recognizes that. Anyone who's been through trauma knows trauma is trauma. And it doesn't matter, if mine is not quote unquote as bad, it still fucking hurts. Right?
Oh, yeah. I think it's something that gets lost. And I'd love to hear you talk about this, but I've been talking about it a lot because I think it's something that gets lost for straight white guys.
Yeah.
Because we're not,
for sure.
If you're progressive and if you're enlightened, you can understand privilege. I understand privilege. I totally get it. I've read about it. I center myself in different spaces as much as I can. But that doesn't mean, and I don't want you to think that I don't suffer and have pain and have struggle. And that's why so many straight white guys are killing themselves, just literally taking their lives.
Why they're hurting other people.
And even worse.
And why they can't uncenter themselves.
Right.
Trauma is at the root of oppression for both sides.
Yeah. For all people.
And it doesn't mean it's okay or anything, right? But people, the phrase hurt people is elastic. And it does cover some of the worst people in the world. And it does cover straight white guys.
Yeah.
You are oppressed by your own trauma. You are oppressing because of, not you personally, but,
No, that's true. I am.
Being the person whose function in capitalism is to oppress other people kills your soul.
It does also because you think when you're not being this, living in this patriarchal, when you're not succeeding, when you're not producing and supporting your family and doing all the things and creating opportunities for other people, you're a failure.
Yeah.
You're not living up to who you're supposed to be with the privileges you've gotten. Or by the way, one thing that is so common, just while I'm talking about men one more minute, you turn 45 or 50 and you're at the executive level now, and then you get laid off and you cannot get another job at that salary in any industry. And now you're a fucking zero. You made it all the way here, and now look at you. You're worthless. And now your wife looks at you and says, what happened to you? I thought you were a big high-income earner.
And again, because that person and capitalism has defined him into that place.
Yes. Yes.
That's because he cannot see that there are other ways to get worth. Because he is not there to be why don't I take care of the kids?
No, right.
That can be
right.
Hey, I lost my corporate CEO job. Yep. I guess let's try and figure out if we can do with less, and I will be the one that stays home with the kids, and we'll figure out the rest. And I will, because that is something you've been doing for no money for years and years, whatever. It's not getting worth from anything else. And obviously white women are a whole nother part of this conversation too. That are kind of toxic. There's nothing more poisonous than white women's tears, but it's tears of self-pity and not what can I do and how can I center someone else?
Right.
And it also to kind of create space. I leaned on friends a lot in this past 3 years, sometimes too much, honestly. I went, another great therapy saying, I went to the hardware store looking for oranges, meaning I went to people who love me and who care for me and want to help for me, but they don't have the language or the skills or the infrastructure to be able to help me if I'm really in crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. But you also mentioned in that conversation with your friend too, about what help looks like. And sometimes it's not necessarily even listening, much less telling people what you think. Sometimes it's just showing up and hanging out and watching TV, or, I like to garden, come over and help me, put these plants on the ground. We don't even have to talk, just to be next to somebody and know you're not alone kind of thing is super helpful.
And sometimes it's helpful to have people draw boundaries. Sometimes it's actually good for someone to say, you know what? I know, right? Sometimes it's good for someone to say, you know, I can't help you right now.
Yeah.
Like I had to have more than one friend say, seeing you struggle like this is hard on me. And what I would love is for you to find help that is more like suitable to the task at hand. And I don't mean necessarily professional. Like I really leaned into 12-step programs and into therapy, and leaning into 12-step programs. And I know the controversial and just and all the things. There's so many weaknesses, and let's set aside that for now, because I'm willing to admit like all the faults of many.
Yeah, I wish I knew, for another time. It'd be interesting to hear you just take on all the criticisms, because obviously it's not perfect, but you're not.
Many of the criticisms are completely valid. Right. And, like AA was founded by rich white guys, and it retains the biases of those people. Although I also think as a radical anarchist organization, it's uniquely positioned to also do something about that.
Yeah.
But one thing I will say about 12-step programs, though, is like when you're newly sober, the people that can help you the least are the people that love you the most. Because in part, and this is sort of what my experience was the past 3 years, the people I really love, when they start to love on me and tell me that everything's okay and that I'm great and that, all the things that are true, of course, that's like getting a scaffolding from the outside. That's like getting support of a building that's going to fall down that gets from the outside. And I will just lean on that because you're making me feel so good. And what I really need to do is kind of build up some infrastructure and
some rebar, some concrete reinforced rebar where you don't need the scaffolding. It's in you. Yeah. And communities such as 12-step programs are good for that, in part because there's some scaffolding that actually it's not as strong. Like they're not what happens in a 12-step community or other kinds of communities as well, is that it's a community of scaffolding, but no one person really is like taking on everything, like it's the group. They're all there for you, but you're not like calling like necessarily like one person all the time. Right. And it's not one person who's responsible for holding you up, and you're given the tools to build up on the inside. I wonder if we can change to another issue that you talked about. I haven't heard you talk about it as much, but obviously what are you, 50, 51?
51.
I'm 48. And a lot of people get separated, they get divorced. Mm-hmm. And then they have a question. Do I want to date? Do I ever want to get serious with somebody again at this point? How do I feel about living alone? How do I feel about living with someone? Where do I want to live? And there's all kinds of opportunity. There's all kinds of trouble. There's all kinds of challenges. And I think it's kind of what I hear a lot of people say, and I can't remember the joke, but my friend comedian Ted Alexander used to do a joke about how much he loves being single, except for like 1/2 hour around the time he'd go to bed, and then he'd wake up and be so happy again. So I think sometimes people want it when they want it and don't when they don't. But given your relationship history, given where you're at in your life, how much do you think about relationships at this point? And how much do people in your situation or tangentially close to it talk about it and deal with it too? Because I think that'd be interesting to hear you discuss with others as well.
I have a
Women or men.
Lady friends who are also late 40s, early 50s, who've we joke about, we're just like kind of over relationships. I finally understand. This is going to sound very weird. I haven't started dating again, but I finally understand ethical non-monogamy, like in terms of like, oh, like really genuinely like playing I kind of understand like, oh, maybe that is something I could do, because like, I don't want to be in a partnership for a while. Do you know people who have been successful at it, whatever that means, like happy they've tried? I don't know what that means exactly. Right. And part of me suspects that all the guys that have it in their profiles just mean they're married and want to cheat on their wives. But I'm hopeful that maybe there's some genuine, I don't know if it's maybe I just mean playing the field. Maybe I just mean non-monogamous rather than, I don't know if I'm not sure about the terms. I haven't started dating yet. But I guess what I'm saying is I understand not wanting to be in a like straight, I mean, like just a marriage, traditional relationship. I understand that in a way that I didn't before. You know, like I think my goal was always like partnership. Of course, that's what you want. You want partnership. And I just think maybe having someone to have sex with every once in a while is like, maybe that's more like what I want. Anyway, that's more personal than I thought I would get, but it's something I've been thinking about lately because I finally even am thinking that way. I'm finally just even thinking about not just being alone, which I have enjoyed. I really love being single. I love living by myself, although I do have 2 cats and a dog. So
well, that's one of the joys of being single, too, is the animal relationship that a lot of people absolutely have that keeps them a certain kind of company and having a certain kind of relationship that isn't human. I mean, it's a whole different thing. But I also appreciate what you did say, and I'll keep it in if you let me. But I think it's the kind of thing I'd like to hear you talking about with other people, men and women, because it's a whole new world out there with anybody who is newly single, period, but with people our age who there's new ways to meet people online and apps, and who knows how to navigate
forms of relationship. Like I think the whole like throuple thing, I mean, I don't know what I feel about these new kind of
but I want to hear you talk them out. I want to hear you talk them out with other smart people.
I would love to. There's interesting stuff happening, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's confusing as hell. I don't know what the hell people are doing.
I don't know either. I mean, it's like I went straight from like, I haven't dated for 20 years. Like I got married 20 years ago for the first time. And then I didn't really date very much before I got married again. So like I haven't been on the apps or like really kind of had casual dates in a long time. And so that will be interesting when and if that starts again. I'm going to talk about living by myself a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
I do love it. I joked with you before we started recording that I feel like one of the things is I've gotten so much more casual about a lot of the stuff that, you know, just that you do to make yourself presentable and seem kind of civilized, right? Like I leave the bathroom door open when I go to the bathroom. Fine. You know, like I don't care anymore. Like I walk around in my underwear a fair amount. I close the blinds and everything, but like I do walk around in my underwear. Like I am very unpicky about what I eat and how I eat it. Like there's a lot of standing over the sink. Oh, well, like it saves some dishes. Like for a while when I first started living by myself, I haven't weighed myself in 30 years either. I didn't bring my scale with me to my new house. And after 20 years of trying to feel like I want to be in shape in part because I want to look good I want to look good in general, but I'm very aware of like wanting to be attractive for a partner. I started eating like a 10-year-old for a while. Like I had a lot of chicken nuggets and a lot of pizza and a lot of ice cream. And I just didn't care. And I was just like, well, I was running a lot too at the time. So I was just like, fuck it. Like, you know, it'll all even out or it won't. I don't care anymore. Now, the interesting thing about that was I did wake up one day and was like, I could go for a salad. I think I'm done eating chicken nuggets for dinner every night. I think I might be done. I do get them occasionally. Actually, what I really love are the Trader Joe's vegan, not chicken nuggets.
Really?
Yeah, those are really great. And the Trader Joe's pepperoni pizza, those were the 2 things I kind of lived on for 6 months.
But the point about, I mean, it sounds pretty attractive to be able to have the type of freedom in your own space to do all the things that you just said and not have to worry about. I mean, I think just like, I hate that I'm not always very clean and that I don't always put things away, that I create messes. I hate it. I've read every book. It's like, I've tried everything to be less messy, but part of it is the guilt of having somebody else. It's disrespectful to leave messes for somebody else. It's really disrespectful, I feel. And not having to feel that way is a kind of freedom. I mean, most people who are married or live with other people call that going to a hotel. Like, you just leave shit everywhere. Like, I even leave, like, when I shave my beard, I feel bad, but I'll leave the clippings in the sink. I'm not cleaning up. I'm at a hotel. I'll leave a tip. But you can do that all the time if you live alone.
Yeah.
Is what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like.
I just was cutting my toenails, actually, right before this.
Oh, good.
And just cutting them, sitting in front of the TV. Like, I don't know. It's just, I often, like, I don't shower hardly much at all comparatively. Like, I mean, that sounds, I guess there's been I think COVID has made people rethink showering frequency in general. Like, a lot of this happened at the same time as COVID. So I think a lot of people are rediscovering, like, the joys of not being as overly hygienic.
Well, yeah, a lot of people they're not even going into an office every day. So why do you have to clean up?
I wear the same clothes all the time. Yep. But the only time I really miss having a partner, the only time that I've cried about it is I got really sick.
Right. Having someone to be there to take care, to dote on you.
Yeah, I had a manic episode, and then I had a few months of dealing with med changes, and then I got like sick. The thing that everybody's gotten, it seems like it's like a flu or something. I got that in December. It was like right after I straightened out all my meds and everything, and sort of mental health wise was starting to get back on track. I got really physically sick, and that was really all of that.
You were alone.
There were times during that period that I got teary about feeling really like I would really like them.
What was it that you missed? Someone's empathy, or someone literally bringing you soup? I mean, can't we just hire a nurse?
When I got sick, that was the worst, actually. Like, when it was just the mental health stuff, in some ways, like, that was easier because I had, like, I was basically able to take care of myself. Like, I could get out of bed and whatnot. Like, when I was sick, there was like a couple days that I actually literally couldn't get out of bed. That's not quite true. I thank God for, like, delivery, like drugstore delivery.
Yeah.
Because what I wound up doing was getting drugstore delivery of like tissues and
you can get
Theraflu and all that. I had this like little shrine in my kitchen that was like all the various like things between like Theraflu and tissues, and those are the main things, I guess. Like various.
Your kitchen looked like a CVS counter.
It did. It really did. And I was drinking a lot of actually Trader Joe's ginger drink. It's really good. They have like this powdered ginger. I would mix Theraflu and powdered ginger and squeeze a lemon in there. Lots of honey. That's good stuff.
That's interesting that you say that that's the time when you felt the most lonely, and that other times you feel pretty.
Yeah. I mean, there have been some really sad times, but it's been almost a more existential loneliness and not a partner loneliness.
Right. That's interesting too. And talk about right there.
That's different. Those are two different things.
For sure.
I have felt existentially lonely a lot more than I have felt lonely for a partner.
How important is a community of friends, and you can find them in so many other ways. We've created this amazing community here through the podcast, which I never set out to do or thought would happen. And it's the most wonderful thing I've ever been involved with. And I have all these new friends all over the place, and they have each other and new people coming and going. You mentioned obviously AA, the community, but there's your traditional friends from your life, from school, from work, from where you live. You've lived in several different places. You're a pretty well-known person. You have been exposed to all types of people. So I can imagine you can have as many friends as you want.
Well, I'm not that into friends. I mean, like, I'm picky. That sounds terrible. I think you would know something a little about this, which is that I'm an introvert who can cosplay as an extrovert. And also, I'm really good at meeting people and talking to people when I have a reason to.
Right. Like a journalist.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about doing my podcast, and again, why we should have a follow-up conversation, is I often would have people on the show that I was just fans of.
Sure. Yeah.
Sort of like what you're doing right now.
That's exactly what I'm doing right now.
Like, and I got to be friends with a few of them. Eva Hagberg, who's a wonderful writer, her memoir, highly recommend it. It covers a lot of the stuff we're talking about. It's called How to Be Loved. And it is in the micro genre that I'm also writing in, which is that it's a post-recovery memoir, which is she had been sober for many years and then developed a brain tumor. And so her book is not about getting sober, but it's about sobriety on another level. But I read her book and loved it, and so had her on my show, and now we're friends.
It's my whole career. It's my whole career. Like, most of my close friends are because I had them on the show. A lot of them. Yeah. A lot of them are, at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to be able to.
I could drop other names, but there's a few.
Drop another name. Drop one more.
Oh, Kiese Lehman. And his book.
No idea how to spell that.
Heavy. Kiese Lehman. He's now a professor at Rice. He's also got a MacArthur Genius Grant. But his memoir, Heavy, is really beautifully written. And also it's a memoir by a Black man that includes struggling with an eating disorder, which I think, you just don't hear a lot of people talking about. So it's really vulnerable and brave. And he and I really bonded over having like enmeshment trauma with our moms, like having a real overly intimate, not necessarily in a sexual way, but like overly intimate relationship with a mother.
Wow. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Really beautiful book. I mean, horrifying on one level, but, beautiful and enriching and ultimately hopeful. And he's just a terrific human being in addition to being graceful and lyrical. I guess everybody uses words lyrical like that, but he is a lyrical writer. And then Melissa Phoebos is another memoirist who I've gotten to know, and I find her work to be very powerful and identify with it very, very much. She's also sober.
Do you have friends who aren't sober?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Most of my good friends are not. So my best friend in the world is not, my best friend of 20 years is not sober, but I have a lot of good friends who are too.
You said you're picky. Tell me about the qualities of your best friend. What's this person so special?
Oh, Tracy.
Well, you'd have to say her name, but
her name is Tracy.
What's up, Tracy?
She is my best friend. We call each other. It's funny because we've called each other twins, but we are also very different. But what we have in common, I think, having a sense of humor in common cannot be underestimated.
No, it cannot be.
It is I think maybe the most important thing.
For people who have sense of humor.
Yeah. She and I laugh at the same shit and are offended by the same shit too, I think. And that doesn't mean our worldview is exactly the same, but it means that we have a kind of shorthand language with each other. And also I think that she's, talented and brave and has succeeded through challenges that take a lot of bravery to withstand. And I admire the fuck out of her.
Let me ask you how you communicate with Tracy and how often, because I have
hard, huh?
Well, I have a relationship with a man who's basically my husband. I think we might be codependent. He lives in Australia. And so we use this app, and I use it with a lot of people, and it's especially good for men because you just have to listen. But you leave a video message. It's called Marco Polo. And
what?
It's called Marco Polo is the app. And I can speed you up too. Like, all right, let's fucking go. Get to the point. I know you worked out today. But the point is, we talk every day through that app. And almost exclusively through that app. I went and saw him and his family for a couple weeks in Australia last summer. But how do you talk to Tracy? Like, do you text? Do you talk on the phone? Do you see each other?
Mainly memes.
Just send each other memes, funny things.
Mainly memes, not necessarily funny, but lots of forwarding Instagram posts. We have a couple of there are actually a few writers out there, some newsletters that we forward each other with snarky comments.
That's fun.
And we're both dog moms. So there's a lot of dog talk. She sent me a Valentine's Day card that was she's not a cat person, but she knows that I am, as we say, bipedal.
Cat and dog. Is that right?
Yeah. And she sent me a Valentine's Day card that was Valentine's Day cards from your cat, which includes I tolerate you.
That's funny.
And then of course when then we talk when we can.
Yeah.
You know, she's the same age I am, and she's got a very interesting, successful career, and she's happily married. That is one difference between us. And she's got a busy life, and, you know, it's hard to make time for even the most important people. And sometimes that means I don't think it's taking them for granted if you are able to like pick up whenever you want. Like our conversations sometimes are on pause for a week or 2 weeks, but it's one ongoing conversation. Right.
I both agree with that. I agree with that, but I also like the phrase, and I use it now. Like this friendship could use, you know, we need to water it a bit. We need to water. We need to feed it. Like, I think it's true. We pick up right where we left off. We get along great no matter how long passes. But like for me at this point in my life, the people that I'm closest with, I like to keep it watered. Like to keep it.
I think there are seasons though.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Like I think there are times where it's just a rhythm. You know, there are times where you're more in touch and times when you're less in touch. And one thing, like she and I have had times where things have gotten less comfortable between us. But 20 years, man, like it's like a marriage. Like you don't go through 20 years without having a stretch that maybe isn't as good as other stretches.
No doubt about it.
But that's what makes loving each other possible, is the ability to tolerate times that aren't as smooth, that aren't as easy. And hopefully you have more than one friend and those times don't overlap. Hopefully, you know, and I think that's important too. I mean, I think I love having a best friend. I love that we can call each other best friends. Yeah. And even though that's like what 12-year-olds do.
No,
I also know that for both of our sakes, need other friends as well.
For sure.
Like she needs other friends. Like we need friends who are also very best friends. Although again, like, I don't know, I might get a little jealous if she had somebody else that she called her best friend.
But hilarious.
I do need other really good friends.
You do.
And I need the people in my 12-step programs who are something different than best friends.
Accountability partners of some sort.
Yeah. I mean, I love them. But for me, like there are people who use AA as a social club, and that's fine. And I do social stuff with people sober all the time. But there are also people who I probably see socially hardly ever, but who I would call in a heartbeat if I thought I was going to drink, or if my heart was broken, or if I was struggling with something that was related to my very particular dysfunctions as an alcoholic and person in recovery from childhood trauma.
That's great that you have. That's great that you have. I think a lot of people don't have that. And sometimes it's hard for any number of reasons for people to acquire those people in their lives. And it's that much more difficult to go through all of these things without those different types of people for different types of things.
Tell you, there are 12-step programs for everything.
Are they really? They're really like...
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, we probably shouldn't go through the list with you here right now, but I will say ACA should get more public love.
Adult children of alcoholics.
Adult children of alcoholics and dysfunctional families. And if you're curious, there is something called the laundry list, which you can Google, and it's the traits of an adult child of alcoholic or dysfunctional family again. And if you want to go through that list right now, we can. It is often very revealing. You looking it up?
I'm looking it up. Laundry list. I'm going to link to it. And
ACOA.
I'm going to read into it and learn more about it before I talk about it with you. But I do not have.
It's for me, like perfectionism is up there. Like weird, kind of complicated feelings about authority, which also I have a feeling you might share with me.
I don't know what gives you that idea, but
ACA people are often like real all or nothing folks, black and white folks. And I'm that way about authority. And this is not something I'm an only child, so this is probably what complicates it, but I both love rules in kind of an abstract sense. Like I think good rules are great. And I consider myself to be a very moral person. like rules in that sense. Like some things are right and wrong. Like there are right things and wrong things, like civil rights. I feel very strongly about them. Like that, I don't really see a gray area. But at the same time, I also hate authority.
Yeah.
I also just detest authority.
I think I feel exactly the same way. I think I think of authority of like law enforcement or corporate executives. Mm-hmm. Those are the two.
But at the same time, like I have this real strong pull towards other kinds of rules, other kinds of authorities. Yeah. Like I do feel very strongly about certain kinds of rules being obeyed. Like I want everyone to do them. Like I want us all to like follow this one.
It's an interesting
I like
conversation to talk about how you raise children when you have those beliefs. So I've tried to raise my girls without being a boss or the authoritarian or this figure, while also having a certain moral clarity, set of rules that we live by. And it has not gone perfect at all times for sure, but I definitely have a good, I think they don't see me as a real authority. They push back. They have their own ideas about things. And that was the goal.
One reason I haven't had kids, honestly.
Yeah. No, fair enough. My brother was the exact same way.
Like I will say that my father volunteered for the civil rights movement in the 1960s and has a almost spectrum like feelings about like moral clarity. Like there is right and wrong, and like racism is wrong. Like he told me a story once that I think is adorable and he doesn't realize how unique it is, which is that he was telling me about how he got involved in doing the protests in Fort Worth in 1966. And he said, a group of black students came and talked to young Democrats, TCU young Democrats, and was like, so this is what we need you to do. Show up at this corner. We have a van and we have the signs and we just need you to not do anything. Like you can't talk, don't interact. Like just we'll take you to the place and do the protest, and if you get approached, don't fight it. It's SNCC. It's the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And so he did. He was like, all right, that sounds like something that we should do. And so he would show up and they'd go and carry a sign and not talk to people and get spit on, maybe. He said there wasn't any violence at the things he went to. And he was like, and I don't know why more people didn't do it. He was like, they made it really easy. It was like really straightforward. And it was, what they were doing was right. So why didn't more people do it? And I'm like, oh, Dad. But that's sort of how I was raised, was like, just do it. Like, you're just supposed to do the right thing. Like, it's just not a question. Like, when you're presented with the opportunity to do a right thing, like.
And what do you think about that now? I mean, do you think that worked? Was that appropriate for him to raise you that way? He was wrong.
Oh, I mean, I think that's one of the few ways, I guess, I have no ambivalence about it. Like, yeah, I think that, because at the same time, he was also very clear that people who disagreed with us weren't bad. They were wrong, but not bad.
Does he still feel that way?
Yeah.
He feels that way about Trump supporters? They're not bad people. They're just.
Yeah, and I feel that way too. I feel like that's really tragic, like where they are. I mean, we just talked about this, they're traumatized.
Well, we didn't talk about that. I want to talk about that.
We talked about in general sort of straight cis, white men, but those are straight cis white men who hurt people.
Yeah.
Trump,
no doubt about it.
Trump was emotionally abused as a child. Then he passed that on.
That's right.
I mean, I think that to call someone bad or evil that's something that the other side does.
I agree with that. I have a hard time, and I've struggled at times with the idea that I don't want to see anybody suffer. I don't want to enjoy their suffering. And what I find is that there's a strain of psychology where people, that's the motivating factor. Cruelty is the point. I want your liberal tears. I want to drink them. I want to, as a matter of fact, pull ahead of you in my big truck and blow black smoke. I want to cause you pain. I struggle with that idea. I don't want that. I don't want to do that to anybody.
And those people are doing it because they don't know any better. And I want to say also, it's sort of cheap and there's some people who get to have more sympathy than others. If you've been really hurt and damaged by someone like that, like I'm not expecting everyone to like have the kind of like, oh, they're, hurt people. Yeah. Like anger is appropriate. Rage is sometimes appropriate. I can't tell people like not to have a reaction that their reaction.
Help me with this one.
Having.
Help me with this current one, and then I'll let you go. But it's currently we're in the school board fight, and we're dealing with the same people that everybody's been hearing about around the country. Moms from Liberty, Turning Point USA. They're now touting libs from TikTok. Their latest issue is LGBT related, trans kids in the bathrooms, and it's gotten very, very ugly. But the point is, this same guy, one guy really, leads it every year. He creates this controversy. And what he does is he always takes a vulnerable group and he makes them the aggressor. I have no grace left for him. None. And because I find that to be the most egregious thing, taking the people who are most likely to be victimized, and specifically even vulnerable families, and then making it seem like they're the threat. They're the aggressor. I just can't get away from my feelings, which are very binary. That's bad. It's very, very bad to do. And you keep doing it every year, this one guy. And I think of him even in my meditations. I hate to even admit it out loud. I try to give him grace, but I'm empty. There's nothing left. Granted, he's done bad stuff to people, including me,
and I think that's what I sort of mean by not everyone needs to have grace at the same time, perhaps. Like, I get it. Like, I think that there are people for whom I don't have a lot of grace, right? And that's why we don't run the country based on any one person's feelings about. So hopefully that's what we try not to do, right? Like sometimes our country gets like put into a position where one person's personal feelings about others is how we make policy. But that's why, like, I don't believe in the death penalty. Right.
Well, yeah.
Is that one person's rage at somebody, justifiable rage and desire for vengeance, shouldn't be how we make policy.
That, and a lot of people are innocent of the crime.
Yeah. Well, I would say both.
Yeah.
I mean,
of course.
That innocent part is important, but actually even like as important to me is the idea that we don't like exact
fully agree
vengeance. We have justice, not vengeance.
Yep.
Right. And so I think that there are times when and again, historically oppressed people, I don't want to ask them to have grace, like for people that have hurt them over and over and over again.
Right.
But at the same time, I don't want to make policy based on that level of hurt for anyone. That level of hurt also is how we get the bad policies of the Trump supporters, right? Like they're making policy out of hurt. So individual feelings are going to be individual feelings. They're also just feelings. I've heard somewhere feelings aren't facts, something like that. Like just because you feel this guy is bad and I don't, and he might, I don't just, you're not going to go out and you're not on a jury. You don't have, am I making sense? Like,
yes, for sure.
You don't have to feel, I'm not asking, I think it's perfectly understandable that you feel the way you feel. I would hope if you were somehow on a jury judging this guy, like, well, maybe you'd excuse yourself from the jury.
No, I would say on a jury. I would say never met him. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, but then that's not great. Honestly, like that's not great.
You're absolutely right.
I would like.
I'm not familiar with his work. My name. I would even give him a false name.
Like, or I would ask you if you're on the jury to like really try to consider the evidence. I don't know. Like,
sure,
but these are different things, right? Like, also having someone be a dick and getting socially ostracized is not the same as having to go to jail.
Right.
So if what your feelings about him lead you to not speak to him or lead you to want him to be deplatformed, that is fine.
Well, what do you think about homicide? Like, I feel like I could do the time.
I hope that doesn't happen. But I have a flexible moral position on punching Nazis. Like I'm all like, I think in my position on punching Nazis is not flexible. I actually think it's pretty pretty straightforward.
I think
my position on punching Nazis is actually pretty consistent, which is that I am pro punching Nazis, but of course you should have to pay whatever, society says it's not good to go around punching people. We have laws against that. A jury would probably let you off, but
would you punch a Nazi? There are these Nazis.
I'm not very good at punching.
So you would but if I wanted to punch a Nazi, you'd be like, listen.
I would applaud you if you did it. And then if a police officer came over, I'd be like, well, Pete, you did punch him. And I would hope for jury nullification.
Would you?
I would go to bat as your lawyer and
I was wondering if you would just leave me there with the cop also. Would you just be like, I actually have to go also. You shouldn't have punched that guy.
No, I stay with you for moral support. And I might explain to the police officer, hey, you could be a one-man jury nullification here. Oh,
all right. Yeah.
Well, you could just decide it's okay this time in the same way that you decide that speeding tickets sometimes get let off. What do you say? Right. He's a Nazi. He's a guy who says he's a Nazi. And also in the Richard Spencer, we have to remember in the Richard Spencer example, it is a self-identified Nazi. This is very clear to me. If there's any doubt if it's a Nazi, then I think it's a little bit morally, it's grayer, right? Because
unfortunately, though, I'm not sure if that police officer, the one I have in my mind, would necessarily agree. I'd be like, he has a swastika tattoo on his arm, and the officer's like,
well, then we'd have to go for jury nullification.
I don't know if that makes him a Nazi.
Right. We'd have to but you understand, it's possible to be for punching someone, but also think there's a reason why we as a society, we've decided it's not okay to go around punching.
Yes. You button that right up. Well explained. Absolutely. I do. I fully support that community standard and morally clear position for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's weird. People who are violence is always wrong. I'm like, well, actually, I don't know if that's true. There is a moral position that consists the Quakers and whatnot, right?
Yeah, right. Right.
Sure. But usually the people that are arguing not to punch Nazis are not anti-war. They're usually okay with, invading countries and whatnot. So surely we can punch a Nazi.
I was hoping we get the Nazi punching right here at the end. I'm glad that we can.
Yeah.
It's important.
But I think that summarizes also my feelings about you can't expect people. Grace is not something you have to have for everybody all the time. And it's just kind of an ideal you want to go for, I think.
I like that.
I think it's easier on you personally to not feel easier on everyone. I think everyone, for selfish reasons, should try to cultivate grace for others.
Absolutely. Fully agree. And so does the Buddha.
Yes. I want to leave you with something which I thought was really interesting. I heard in a meeting the other day that, the Buddha's saying life is suffering is how it's usually translated. That it also can be translated as life is discomfort.
Mm.
And I like that better because discomfort is something that I think we can more easily understand as passing. It's a state. It's not a constant thing.
I like that very much. It's one of the things I like most about you is your ability to see kind of split a word and language. And I also love when you come out of those meetings and go on Instagram and say something that you learned. And I think people often can talk about the same problem or thing or situation or relationship so differently in such a way that it really computes or connects with different people. That's certainly been the way I have always been. You could tell me the same flaw about myself 10 different ways, but on that 11th time, I finally get it. Or teach me how to do this math problem 5 different ways, but wrong teacher. It didn't work for me. But that's what I loved about talking to you and reading you and listening to you is your ability to continue to do that. So I hope that you will. And all the way.
You're going to be my executive producer.
Let's go. LFG.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, there you go. What did you think? AnnaMarieCox.com. Join her virtual writing workshop if you want. Buy her a coffee. Support her. Looks like I'm going to help her produce a podcast. We'll see. You never know. But I was real excited to catch up with her, and I hope that you appreciated that over a 1-hour conversation. For those of you that are still listening, let me know what you thought, Bumblebees, and let me know if you'd like to hear more conversations like that with folks that are willing to be so vulnerable and transparent and honest the way that Anna was with me there. All right. Well, that's it. That's all I've got for you. Hope to see you at tonight's Hangout. Probably will be dropping a conversation with Eric Siegel later today, so look for that. And otherwise, I'll talk to you tomorrow when I think Christian Finnegan and Ophira Eisenberg are set to join me.
Keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. You got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run.